Thank you all so much for joining us for our last webinar of our 2023 season. Today, we're going to be reviewing 2023 as we look forward to 2024. We have a great conversation lined up with our speakers. We're going to be highlighting advancements, milestones, and challenges from 2023 and give insights to 2024. I am Simbiat Yusuf Muller. I am the events manager at Fourth. Before I pass it along to our facilitator of our conversation today, Jeff Allen, our executive director at Fourth, we have a few updates and announcements from the Fourth team. We do not have any presentations prepared because this is going to be a facilitated roundtable conversation. So you can submit your questions as we go through in the attendee chat, and we will make sure we're getting to them as they come in. We will also be sharing a recording of this session with you all after the webinar, and that would also include some resources to follow up with the conversation, some light reading over the holidays. And if this is your first time, I also want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone that has tuned in more than once to our webinar this season. But if you're new here and you don't know anything about Fourth or what we're doing, we are on a mission to electrify transportation. We're bringing people together, convening space to create solutions that reduce pollutions and barriers. Our work is focused in 5 areas. We have our access to electric cars, access to charging, access to emerging modes, events and partnerships, and policy advocacy. If you would like to learn more about Fourth, our work, or just what we do at Fourth, you can find that information on our website at fourthmobility.org. And as we wrap up this season, I want to do one final thank you and shout out to our members and our sponsors for making sure this webinar program continues and for your support of the webinar programs. It is not too early or too late to start thinking about how you might want to support us in 2024. If you have any questions on membership, sponsorship, you can reach out to our partnerships and membership manager, Rachel Haverkamp. Our email is here, but it will also be in the recap email. And we've talked about what we do at Fourth, but if you would like to join the Fourth team or know someone that is interested or looking for a position right now, we are hiring for our grant accountant. We will include more information on that in the webinar recap, and you could also find that information in the link that was just shared in the attendee chat. Ooh, the call for proposals for the Roadmap Conference is closing soon, about 3 more days. On Friday is the last time to submit any proposals. We aren't looking for anything academic at this moment, just 100 to 500 words that are centered around our 4 tracks of the conference. The 4 tracks are cars, vehicles, charging, cutting edge, and impact. If you are working on any best practices reports that should be shared with the attendees at the conference, please think about submitting a proposal for the 2024 Roadmap Conference in Detroit, Michigan. We are also still seeking sponsors. If you're interested in demonstrating your leadership in transportation electrification or highlighting your brand at the conference, this is a great time to think about supporting the conference. More information on that can be found on the website as well. And registration, it's never too early or too late to save. We still have our pre-sales tickets up, and that will be ending January 26th. Save. It's always great to save. And we just want to announce that our EVAL Electric Vehicle Adoption Leadership Program is hosting some information sessions. These are bi-weekly information sessions about the EVAL certification process, benefits, and recognition. If your organization is looking to install workplace charging, this is somewhere you definitely want to be connected, and more information on that will also be in the recap and in the link shared. And for that, now I will pass it over to our facilitator, Jeff Allen. Join me on stage so we can start the real conversation that we're all here for.
Thanks so much, Simbi, and thank you all for being here. And I will apologize in advance. Seem to be having some video issues, but hopefully the audio is coming through okay. And besides, you're not here to hear from me primarily, you're here to hear from our great panelists. So we're going to jump right into it, but one last announcement I have to share. We're here to talk about highlights from the past year, which has been another unprecedented year in electric mobility, and what we're looking forward to in 2024. And one of the things that has made the last year or so unprecedented is the massive federal investment in transportation electrification that's happening right now. But we're also aware that that also creates challenges, and that the communities that are most able to benefit from those investments are often the least able to take advantage of them. So we're very excited to announce this week, and the details will be going out in the follow-up email, that we'll be hosting some workshops face-to-face for local and state transportation officials and their partners around how to design equity-centered transportation electrification programs, and perhaps of more immediate interest, how to secure federal funding to pay for those programs. Those will be on March 14th in Washington, D.C., and April 17th in Chicago. And we're keeping those affordable and, in fact, free for nonprofit organizations. So check those out. We also will be providing some asynchronous training online that folks can access to build those programs, and we'll share that link as well. Without further ado, though, we're going to move into the actual session. As we do that, I think Cindy's going to put up some poll questions just to get us grounded in who's in the room. So if you could share with us some information about what sector you represent. And there's going to be another question coming in a minute about how long you've been in the industry. So if you need to get a calendar out or check your phone, you can get ready for that. We have got an amazing panel for you here today. First up, and speakers, turn on your cameras as we go here, we've got Matt Oberhoffner from Heising-Simons Foundation, who spent over a decade on winning advocacy campaigns in the climate and clean air space. And I'm going to keep the intro short. We have Andrea Marpillero-Colomina, who's with the Sustainable Communities Program Director at GreenLatinos, who advocates for policymaking to create a just and environmentally sustainable future for our communities. We have Dr. Austin Brown, who leads the Vehicle Technologies Office at the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. And we have Alex Keros, EV Infrastructure Director at General Motors. And I'm going to, now that I have you all on camera, we're going to do a quick round robin and say, in 2 minutes or less, what's one transportation electrification headline you were most excited to see in the last year, and why? And why don't we just go in that same order that I just introduced you? So we'll put you on the spot first, Matt. And if folks in the audience want to type your answer into the chat, that would be fun to see too.
Thanks, Jeff, and great to be here. I think for my headline, I've chosen one straight off of the EPA press page. Biden administration proposes strongest ever pollution standards for cars and trucks to accelerate clean transportation future. I think that was a great way to start the year. And depending on what comes in the next couple of months, they could have a good shot of my favorite headline of 2024 as well.
Great. Andrea?
Sorry, I lost the mute button. My headline is about the California Advanced Clean Fleets rule that was passed in April, and the headline reads, California approves groundbreaking regulation that accelerates the deployment of heavy-duty ZEVs to protect public health. And I think this is going to be a really exciting regulation that obviously is going to set precedent for other states and really push automakers and and governments and lobbyists to really think carefully and closely about what is their next set of strategic moves.
Great. Austin?
I mean, those lots of exciting stuff. It's been an incredible year for people who've been working on this for a long time. It feels all of a sudden like we're moving at warp speed, which is really exciting. If I have to sum up one, I'll say the headline that we've cracked 160 billion with a B in announced investments in EV manufacturing, battery manufacturing, and EV charger manufacturing. Not all those dollars aren't yet all facilities in the ground, but just that companies are coming out with those kinds of commitments to not just going to an electric vehicle future, but building it right here in the United States and in North America. That's just been incredibly exciting this year.
Absolutely. And Alex, not last, not least.
Maybe least, but we'll take that. So no, I obviously a lot of great work across the board, and I echo Austin's point. It's been a pretty amazing year for me as a guy who's been in the industry since pre day one Volt. I think it's cool to see the industry coalesce around a single national standard moving forward, and which meant several of us had to gulp our competitive genes and look at what was good for the customer in the long run, and seeing the industry sort of mostly coalesce. And I imagine it'll finalize here around the NACS standard, which is now an SAEJ 3400 technical information report. I don't think any of us probably woke up in the beginning of the year thinking that was going to happen. So really good thing for customers in the long run, particularly in North America, and excited to see it. So.
Yeah, that may win biggest and most surprising headline for a lot of us, I think. Before we jump into questions, and I have a few questions for each of you, Cindy, can you put up the results of the poll just so we see who's in the audience here? Help shape our answers a little bit. And while she's doing that, I will also say that as we are going here, we encourage folks to drop questions of your own into the chat, attendees, and we will do our best to work some of those into the conversation as well. And we'll see if we can get those stats up. It never fails. The technology works great in the rehearsal, and then it always breaks down in the actual performance. So let's just jump into the questions. Alex, I'm going to start with you since I finished with you before. We've been seeing all these articles of late about how EV demand is slowing or cratering, and sales are up 50% year over year and stronger than conventional car sales. So what's going on? What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think your point is the most salient one, right? Is this journey is not a straight line, and I think most of us who are on the journey understand that. I think those of us who are on the sidelines writing headlines and sensationalizing something that is pretty straightforward, it's a lot better to say EV sales are tanking when the reality is what you just said, right? Growth still remains super, super positive, 50% year over year. We crossed 1 million vehicles in the United States. Global sales well over 1 million on a monthly basis. This is not an industry that's in distress. It's quite the opposite. It's an industry that's growing and one in which is continuing to have a significant amount of investment and poured into it. Is the pace of that growth slowed a little bit for a variety of reasons, whether it's economic or whatnot? Sure. But again, this is not a straight line perspective, and I certainly know here at GM we're entirely committed to an all electric future and continue to invest pretty heavily as we march towards that.
Great, and I'm going to direct these mostly at one of you, but I'm going to invite other folks to pile on or challenge you or add a perspective. Anyone want to add anything to that? All right. We'll see if something comes from the audience too. Andrea, I wanted to ask you about, obviously this administration has had a huge focus on, or much larger focus, at least, on equity through the Justice 40 initiative. How do you grade their progress implementing that vision so far? And are there one or two things you think they've done well? And of course, if there's one or two you'd like them to do better, I'm sure Austin would be taking notes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, it's a work in progress, right? This is the Justice 40 initiative, which prioritizes making sure that funding is available to environmental justice communities, has made, billions and billions of dollars available for transportation programs. I think so far something like $24 billion has been made available. And over the course of the program, something like $200 billion. So we're talking about like huge, unprecedented amounts of money. And obviously there's a lot of growing pains. I think one of the major issues is the fact that, smaller organizations, particularly organizations that are Black and Brown led organizations that are working directly in EJ communities, don't have the capacity to directly apply for this funding because the hoops that you have to jump through to get government funding can be quite formidable. I also think that, as always, right, there's a little bit of a valley that exists between sort of the theory of what a Justice 40 program is going to look like, and then, the practice, right? What's happening as states are, getting money and figuring out what their programs are going to look like. I think a really great example of that is the NEVI program, the National EV Infrastructure Program, has been put into process, and states have submitted their proposals for rolling out their EV infrastructure. And I worked on a report this summer in collaboration with Evergreen and Atlas Public Policy, where we sort of looked at how the states had individually gone about seeking to be inclusive of communities and really have a community inclusive process in the development of their NEVI plans, which is a component of Justice 40 that's essential to making it work. And we really found that it was not great. So there's some work to be done there. But I think that already so much work has been done by federal DOT to really make sure that the funding is there, that people know about the funding, and that it's really going to make measurable and long-term change in the lived realities of communities across the country. And I would be happy to share that resource, the report that I worked on over the summer, in the chat. So I'll figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and we can send a link to that out in the email afterwards as well. There does seem to be that tension, right, sometimes between the equity goals and the speed that we're trying to move at to push these dollars out the door, doesn't there? Anyone want to weigh in on that? I'm watching.
I think there's a lot of progress. Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think we continue to make progress, not fast enough, of course, but I think I saw, when we think about everybody you have to think about rural communities, you have to think about inner cities, you have to think about, when we say accessibility, we're not just talking people in wheelchairs. It's a broad-based approach, and I think there's certainly an awareness of how do you build those, and to your point, involving those communities directly in the participation of that. So you're starting to see those seeds, in my mind, planted. We've done some charging out in rural locations with dealers and other communities. Actually, in Detroit here, one of our highest utilized charging stations is on 8 Mile and Woodward. So if you know 8 Mile, you know 8 Mile what I'm talking about, and it's wildly successful charging station. So how do we continue to sort of do projects, get in those communities, pull from those communities, have them participate in this is key. So it's neat to see a lot of these funding agencies, but those projects come to light as well.
Absolutely. Well, Austin, Vehicle Technologies Office has been at this for a long time. I think the Joint Office has gotten a lot of attention because it's shiny and new. But you guys have been doing this for decades. So can you tell us a little bit about what are you focused on now? How do you work with those other agencies high level, and how are you leveraging those past projects that you've done?
Sure, thank you. I'll try my best to be brief. There's an enormous amount included in that question, and it's all the things I'm most excited about. So I'll try to resist the urge to go on a huge lecture here. As you mentioned, the Vehicles Office has been really at the center of our federal applied R&D around electrifying vehicles for a long time. We did a lot of the work that led to the batteries that ran first hybrid vehicles and now the modern lithium-ion battery. A ton of work driving down the costs of batteries, improving power electronics, shrinking them down so they fit into a smaller portion of the vehicle, advanced materials. Basically, the electric vehicle of today owes a lot to the great research and development that was funded out of our office and done in close partnership with U.S. Car, which represents GM, Ford, and Stellantis, as well as a huge variety of other researchers and industrial partners that got that technology out into the lab. So we see our role as that, at that pivotal point with the applied R&D technologies that are not science projects anymore, but just aren't quite ready to be a competitive technology that industry is ready to put a lot of its own dollars behind. So we're constantly shifting the window of where we think that investment needs to be made. We do that work in a bunch of different program areas, each of which has links to electric vehicles. So we do continued work on batteries, looking at eliminating critical minerals from those batteries and improving performance, on continued improvement to technology electrification, so looking at charging interfaces, looking at how these technologies will apply to other sectors like heavy duty trucks, off-road vehicles, maritime, rail, really looking at the whole transportation system, understanding how EVs fit into mobility systems, not just the vehicle, but how they actually connect to a city, a community, a region that's
Mhm.
planning on what their future mobility should look like and how EVs can be a part of that, but not solve all of those problems. And then working with the Clean Cities coalitions, which I'll hope to talk about a little bit later, that really help bring the technology to reality in communities working across the country. So we try to have that whole applied R&D bridge, working closely on the sort of intake with Office of Science and other early R&D projects, and then helping get those technologies ready for investment by others, including with DOE, our Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains Office that was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, and the Loan Programs Office and other sort of scale ups to get it out of that scale. We invest about $450 million a year overall in applied R&D. That's a big number. That's a really significant needle moving amount to be able to invest in R&D, but it's nowhere close to the scale that we need to actually get technology out there. That's when it needs to get in the hands of industry, in the hands of communities, in the hands of others to really help make that scale up work. You mentioned the Joint Office. We couldn't be happier that the Joint Office was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Um, and we're deeply involved in helping understand that scope. It's a first of kind office that represents both DOE and DOT, and how those two agencies have a clear shared mission around EV deployment, but it requires the expertise at each of those departments to do well. There really is no other office that does that with a shared mission between two federal agencies that allows the two the two agencies to get their work done together. And we're a very close partner with the Joint Office. They're laser focused on charging, on the technical support and standards that's needed to get that national network out there. And then we work with them very closely on everything related to the technology of the charger, understanding under the hood what's going on, understanding the vehicle grid integration and how those chargers will work with vehicles as an ecosystem, and how we're going to get to those kinds of deployments. When they started up, many of their staff were either borrowed or moved over from the Vehicles Office, and we've continued and doubled down on that collaboration. Many of them are colleagues that I've worked with and that our team has worked with for literally decades, and so we couldn't be happier to get to work with them on these things and really take it from before we had been able to do charger demonstrations. Now as a government, we're able to actually build a charging network. That's such an incredible change in scale that we're couldn't be happier to be a part of. And then you just ask, like, what are some other upcoming topics? I know I've probably taken too much time. I mentioned batteries. We're going to continue that. We want to continue to invest in our Justice 40 commitments and make sure that we're that we're doubling down, that we're leading by example on each of those topics. And I'm happy to talk more about some of those specifics. And then we have a ton of new investment in trucks. I think we've seen heavy duty applications of electric technologies come further than we could have expected in the last 5 years, to where those are now really poised to make a huge impact. So thanks. Sorry, I tried to do the overview of all the stuff we do. I hope you can tell I'm excited to talk about more of it, and happy to take any questions on any specifics anybody wants to cover.
Yeah, it's tough when you're talking about billions of dollars worth of programming to do that in 5 minutes or less. So thanks, Austin. And I will preempt questions by saying, obviously you can't talk about pending regulations or pending grant decisions. So if you're gonna post a question about when will I hear about my CFI grant, don't do that. Well, not to take us from that exciting high to a low point, but Matt, you get the downer question of the day, which is, we're going to have a presidential election in about a year that could lead to, let's just say, dramatic course change in all this work. With that in mind, how does that influence what we all ought to be doing now? How do we, work, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, if I could put it that way?
Sure. Well, I don't know that it's specifically related to the election, but I think there are two things that we can be doing that will be beneficial kind of in any eventuality. And first is we've got to lock in the progress is finalizing the strongest possible rules for cars and trucks at the federal level. That's number one. And then number two is to just increase the overall level of awareness amongst the general public about all of the progress we've made so far. So on the federal side, finalizing strong clean car standards in the early part of next year will help spur additional investments in charging and manufacturing, and will follow along with a dozen or so states that have already moved forward to adopt new rules. Just in the past few weeks, we've seen Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Colorado all add new clean vehicle rules, with more states set to follow their lead next year. So the more places that have strong rules like this in place, the more durable our progress is going to be. And the other thing that I think we need to do is make sure that folks know about the progress we've made. And I think the real positive here is that a lot of the investments that are coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA are very popular, and they don't necessarily follow political boundaries. We've seen over $160 billion in investment announcements since these two bills were passed. That's almost 200,000 new jobs in battery plants, assembly lines, manufacturing facilities, and they're everywhere from Michigan to Georgia to Kentucky. It's uniting some Democrats and Republicans, the new jobs, the investments, the strong American manufacturing sector. That's a really good place to be starting from when you think about durability. On top of all of this, there's going to be a bunch more EV charging stations coming from the federal NEVI program and the charging and fueling program once those get going. There's great tax credits for new and used vehicles that people can access. And I think the more folks hear about this and see these investments impacting and improving their daily lives and communities, will really minimize opposition to these rules going forward. I also think it's extremely helpful to have industry leaders like GM and Ford fully committing to an EV future. It's a clear signal to the market that this transition is coming. And if you want to support American manufacturing and industry and innovation, this is the space to look to. So I think it's about finalizing the strongest possible standards for clean cars and trucks, getting the word out about the great strides that we've already seen, making sure folks are seeing these benefits of these rules and programs in their communities.
Great. I feel better. Thank you. Couple more prepared questions before we jump into the audience here. Austin, you alluded to this Clean Fuels Coalitions, or Clean Cities Coalition, sorry. And they just celebrated 30th anniversary recently, but I think not everyone knows about those. Can you talk a little bit more about Clean Cities Coalitions and what role you see them playing?
Yeah, very happy to. I was excited to get to be a little bit of a part of that celebration, and you can really feel the excitement for the coalitions and the members in each area, and how glad they are to be a part of this sort of community of folks working towards their mission of decarbonized transportation future for all communities. It's a long-standing DOE partnership that advances clean transportation nationwide, working in communities. There's more than 75 of them, and they cover well over 80% of people in the United States, and have already led to enormous benefits by helping facilitate local organizations and fleets and companies in understanding options to go to alternate fuels and increasingly electric vehicles and other zero emission vehicles in transportation. They bring this just indispensable capability of being the boots on the ground experts working with local governments, bringing the knowledge and research from federal agencies and laboratories down to the actual decision makers that can act on it. Um, they work both sort of as a support role, and then increasingly we do a lot of our local and deployment funding by working directly with these coalitions. So, for example, in May, Secretary Granholm announced $87 million in project selections that'll help work through these local coalitions to help provide EV charging solutions, looking, for example, at a focus on those who don't have access to home charging, and then many other capabilities for communities to start to build that kind of charging expertise. So our focus going forward is really just how to best empower those communities to advance that vision, and continuing to increase our ambition of driving on the path to zero, while also making sure that we're meeting our commitment for an ever increasing, as we said earlier, an ever increasing um, attention to the communities that need those positive investments the most, the ones that have borne a disproportionate share of the downsides of transportation, making sure that we're actually investing in the benefits and the technologies that will help create those benefits in those communities first and foremost. And the Clean Cities is really the primary way that we are able to do that through the Vehicle Technologies Office.
Great. And we can send out in the show notes a link to the page where you can see if there is a Clean Cities Coalition in your community. For folks on the call, they're a great resource. Let's see, back to you, Alex. You're working on the charging side at GM, and I know for a lot of us, we can remember the day when there was no charging side. So that's great. But I'm really curious, as we go mainstream with EVs, there's a lot more attention to the quality of charging as well as the quantity of charging, which is great. At a really high level, what's going well and what do we really need to do better?
Yeah, another not so small question, but it's also in my mind part of an industry that continues to grow up. So, obviously, quality, reliability of the charging experience, being able to show up, plug it in, and it work every time is where we need to be as an industry, and I think we've shined the light in 2023 on a really important issue of how do we improve that. And so, I think a lot of really good things are happening. First, Austin was mentioning some of the national labs, right? We have ChargeX, which is really bringing together both the industry side of things as well as the labs to really think about this problem holistically. Again, you think these things are sort of should have been done, should have thought about, but having common error codes across various DC fast chargers doesn't exist, right? So, and those error codes happen in different places along its own firmware or process. So, getting the industry aligned around those things and seeing improvements around the importance of that customer experience, I think has been a wholesale importance. Personally, so we've dug really deep with this with our own partnerships with EVgo. We have year over year significant improvements in first plug success as we measure it. So not looking at just pure uptime, but literally measured at a customer's level. I'm super proud. Over the last week, we made a few announcements with the pilot stations. One being the first NEVI site in the country. So when I told Austin several months ago, that we had shovel-ready stuff, we have shovel-ready stuff, and we're bringing it to market. But more important than just getting it out in the market, what is that experience? And there's been some really cool headlines that I'm exceptionally proud of. But plug scores in the mid-9s for a dozen and a half stations that have been open since September. Right, that is a lot of work by GM, a lot of work by our partners in EVgo and Pilot to ensure that we're having a better experience. Now, that's not the entire industry, and we got to bring everybody along. We have a little bit of an elephant in the room as we open up the Tesla superchargers to multiple OEMs, and we're working closely with those guys on a daily basis. They're passionate about I would say staying on top of this issue because they're known for having such a great experience overall. So I think in many respects, there's a lot of attention to the detail on this. Things are moving forward. Things like canopies, pull-throughs. We talk about accessibility. We talk about charging throughout all communities. I think that's going well, but we got a lot of work to do, right? We have mean time to repair stats that are way beyond a few days and those sorts of things. We have other smaller networks who probably has less resources and more focused on growing, not as attentive to those types of details. So my job is to treat all of these teammates equally and making sure that quality experience is there, and we're going to continue to do it. I'm pretty excited about all of that effort as we move forward, but it's a lot of work. Bottom line, you got to put your head down, and you got to pull off scabs and look at warts and make sure that we're improving every day. And I think that's where the industry has been. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone want to pile onto that? I know it hit home for me last New Year's when all my friends had just bought EVs, and we got together at New Year's, and they were all complaining about their experience of trying to get to our coast house for New Year's. And at some point, I realized, no, this is a good thing. This is what happens when you get beyond the very earliest adopters. People who are willing to be pioneers.
Yeah.
We just need to get. We just need to fix it fast. Andrea, I want to get back to you. You kind of touched on this issue of there's unprecedented federal funding, orders of magnitude more than we've ever seen before, and the folks who need it the most have the most barriers to accessing it. So, I mean, I talked a little bit up front about some of the things that we're doing, but what are you seeing that's really helping communities and community-based organizations access the funds, and what thoughts do you have on what else we ought to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, communication. I think like so many smaller frontline orgs are strapped in terms of their resources, and like they don't have the time to be reading or the capacity really to be reading like detailed technical jargon NOFOs from the federal government, nor do they necessarily have the in-house resources they need to apply. Like I was saying earlier, right, many of these grants require you, I mean, you would be very helped by having a grant writer, but you need to have some kind of audit of your organization or some kind of, you need all these like pieces that you need to put together in order to be eligible for these monies. Even when you're a sub-grantee, you've also got to jump through some formidable hoops. And so I think that's a huge issue that I know that, several, DOT and EPA and energy certainly are all very aware of and are all thinking about ways to help mitigate our providing additional resources. I know that organizations like GreenLatinos and others who are sort of like grass middles, as we call ourselves, not grassroots and not grass tops, are seeking to provide additional resources to the organizations that many of our members work for, that are or lead, that are grassroots organizations that really just need some help, right? And I think another thing is just telling folks about what these different opportunities to get funding for their communities look like and mean, right? The explanation of what these funds are and what these programs are often are just like paragraphs and paragraphs of text, and that can be really, really intimidating. It would be cool if there was like even just a mock-up of like, after a project like this is implemented in your community, this is what this could look like, right? And then people could be like, yes, we want this. We want bike lanes. We want raised crosswalks. We want EV charging infrastructure. We want trees. We want, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be incredibly, incredibly helpful. At GreenLatinos, we have done a little bit of just very, very preliminary internal research that we haven't published anywhere yet that looks at the disbursement of IIJA funds in 5 states with sizable Latino populations. So Colorado, California, Texas, New York, and Illinois. And it looks at sort of how those funds have reached those states and what those states are applying for funding for, right? And obviously, as you can imagine, there's quite a difference in sort of what kind of funding California is seeking versus what kind of funding Texas is seeking, and how they are using and applying and sort of making use of those funds so far. So I think like that's a piece of the puzzle, sort of like recognizing, of course, that a lot of this funding and a lot of the way that this funding is allocated is political, and the states have their own political agendas, and that's going to play a big role in sort of how we see this roll out and what that's going to look like in terms of how EV charging infrastructure is deployed and how communities are able to access, take advantage, and, potentially even experience economic gain from it. So, yeah, all of that. I'll stop there because I could just keep going.
Yeah. Well, and if I could just pile on, I'll say in a lot of our work, we're finding it's not just community-based organizations, it's communities, it's cities that also, thanks to our friends at Heising-Simons Foundation and others, we can help communities with some hands-on support to go after funding. But often what we run into is communities that say, we don't know where to start. We don't just need a grant writer. We need somebody to help us think about what would a program look like. And then if we get the funding, we don't have the capacity to actually manage those programs. So we would need support building that capacity over time to actually manage those programs. So it's a good problem to have, I should say, but it's definitely an ongoing challenge. Maybe that's a good segue, Matt. Do you want to talk a little bit about, philanthropy is playing a much larger role in transportation electrification. I know one of the things you're very focused on is how do we help communities access and leverage these federal funds, but can you talk a little more big picture about where you see foundations in this space and what do you see coming?
Yeah, sure. And thanks. And I think it's exactly as Andrea just laid out. There's a ton of new work that's been needed over the past couple of years with these new climate laws, and will continue to be necessary just to sift through all of the new programs that are being implemented, and all of the new funding sources that are out there. That's something that we have focused on at Heising-Simons Foundation. I think it's something that other philanthropic organizations have leaned in on as well. And it's as Andrea said, it's not just getting the grants written. It's even how do you figure out which grant to apply for? How do you get some sequencing happening? How can we be helping to lift up solutions to the federal government? Like maybe there could be a common application form for some of these programs. It's supporting groups like yours, Jeff, who are helping communities and community-based organizations sift through a lot of this and figure out some of these answers. So I think that's certainly one place where we're going to continue to see a lot of work over the next few years. I think the other place that has seen a lot of activity is on the regulatory front, both at the state and federal level, as agencies work to craft regulations, both to implement these new federal programs. What does it look like? Who's eligible? Who's not eligible? What communities can access charging and fueling monies, as well as rules to strengthen the public health protections and fuel economy of cars and trucks. So helping to make sure that advocates have the resources to help agencies get it right and deliver strong federal rules here that are similar to what California and dozens of other states have already put into place is definitely going to be another area of focus in the near term. I think beyond those couple of places, there's a lot of a thousand flowers blooming, right? There are things like battery recycling and mining transition minerals that are getting attention. Accelerating the build out of charging infrastructure, ensuring that utilities and the grid operators are ready and willing and able to energize that infrastructure. There's just a ton there. I think the other really interesting thing that I've started to see, both from philanthropy as well as organically from the field, is an increased focus on approaching mobility questions holistically, and advocates who are doing a lot more to weave together transportation electrification alongside transit and planning and land use in a way that is a bit more equity-centered approach than we've seen today, which is awesome.
Great. Well, I want to get into some of the audience questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to combine some. So there's a couple of questions about what are we doing in rural areas and long distances. I think both for passenger cars and for long haul trucks. So how do we solve that problem? Anyone want to kick that off?
Well, I mean, that's the heart of NEVI, right? I mean, it's the beating drum of getting funding into a national network of charging stations so that every community can be connected. So, obviously we just started that journey, technically, I think on Friday. But there's, if I do my math, something on the order of 400 and or 4,999,000 more dollars to go spend and make it work. But doing it in the right way, I think Andrea and Matt sort of described it as well. Like, we got to be purposeful in all of these communities as we go into them, right? And while I think we need the core backbone of long distance traveling, we have to make sure that we're spending that money in a very thoughtful way. We're not just spending the money, but we're deploying it with folks who are committed to a broad based approach to it. So, the rural charging, as I mentioned, one of the neat things that we've done is working with our dealers who are, it's a crazy statistic. I think we have 4,000 dealers and 90% of the population is 10 miles away from a dealership. You can take from that what you will, but I'm going to take that as an asset and tapping into it, working to deploy level 2 charging in places like Ortonville, Michigan, and other places worldwide. So, we got to just, again, be deliberate about it and continue to invest in it. I think the cool thing about it is, while the government funding grants and work that we just talked about is helping to really accelerate it, the reality is there's a lot of private money leaning into this, which means this is a good business opportunity, generally speaking. So how do we continue to do that so this is not completely on the backs of government or a utility, but really built around how do we do this in a way to make some money. One of the neatest ways of getting somebody inspired to fix a charging station is it's no longer receiving revenue, right? And that inspires you pretty quickly to make that happen. So how do we get a lot of that core business in there, principles as well? So it's neat to see a lot of this continuing, but there's a lot of work to do, and we got to be deliberate about it.
Mm-hmm. I just want to pile on.
Maybe I'll add a little bit on that, but pivoting specifically to talk a little bit about long haul trucking, where I think we're increasingly seeing interest in zero emission, and obviously in our office we're focused on the electric vehicle applications there. We think about things really divided up between depots and corridors. So many truck operations kind of go back to a central depot where we expect the charging will be, and there's figuring out how to work with utilities and get those chargers installed, manage them well, make sure they're a grid resource rather than a grid challenge. And then for the corridors, we really want to look to prove out the operating model in some cases, because there's an enormous prize there for these long haul truck operators. Diesel fuel is either their number one or number two expense in pretty much every case. And if they're able to pivot, then the increased purchase costs go away really quickly from the savings you're able to get in diesel. But there, you really have to plan a corridor and know that that charging is going to be there. So there's a ton of great work going on here. We have 7 planning grants that are underway for corridors, and each of those grantees is looking for, what can they do to go above and beyond that. I'll put in a plug for the Ride on Less activity out of NACFE, the National Association for Freight Efficiency, North American Center for Freight Efficiency, a great program looking at some real world fleets doing this over the road and how they were able to charge. So a ton of interest. We're very interested in going beyond our investments here in these planning corridors and really showcasing what this can look like, because even though it looks like it's sort of been slower to start up than light duty, if you show that it works and companies can save money, boy, you're going to see quick uptake in a lot of those, both in the depot and in the corridor applications.
Great. Yeah, I'm going to pitch another one. There's a combination of questions here for you that I want to throw at you, Alex, around, just to restate, GM's vision. Is there a role for anything other than electric vehicles long term? And then specifically, what's up with plug-in hybrids? I have this vivid memory years ago at a roadmap conference where we did a live focus group when the Volt was still pretty new, asking about the idea and having someone in the focus group say, "That's a crazy idea. Why would you ever have both an electric engine and a gas engine?" So why aren't plug-in hybrids a bigger part of the picture? And where do you see that long-term vision?
Yeah, I could get sucked into probably a policy and a regulatory wormhole on that one.
In 2 minutes
so
or
I'll
less.
just leave it quite there. As an owner of 2 Volts in my lifetime, I can just say I think there's some strong validity to the technology as a transition technology, right? And I think in certain cases, it's we're talking about rural communities as an example. Jumping feet first, perhaps into an all-electric vehicle might not be their top of mind or most comfortable sort of path forward in this. So, I'm a big believer in flexibility and making sure you never say anything for certain, because I think what I've learned in life is as soon as you say something unequivocal, it changes on you in that sense. And so I do think there's industry-wide, there's probably going to be a role for some. And that being said, those of us who live with an EV, man, it is better than the alternative, right? The reality is 90% of the time I'm charging at home. I don't think about how long it charges. I'm actually driving my Silverado work truck from Detroit down to London, Ohio for an event tomorrow. And I have to do a little bit of planning, right? But it's still a really good experience overall. And so I think there's a ripe role for continued investment in EVs. So I don't think that's the notion. I don't want anybody to take that. But how do you use plugins and other technologies? I saw some angst with hydrogen, for example, but hydrogen's a really nice fungible energy holder if you think about it that way, right? And particularly, we talked about long distance and trucks. Storing energy in energy storage batteries is large, heavy, inefficient, if you will. And energy through hydrogen can be managed a lot more easily, right? And it can help decarbonize pipelines, it can help decarbonize transportation, and inefficiently, but possibly round trip back into the grid. So I'm not. I don't think we have to exclude any technologies. I think we have to continue to have an open mind, and there are probably very specific good applications for all of these. EVs are super efficient,
Yep.
right? Light duty vehicles, every day running around, it's probably not going to be beat. But there are other technologies like PHEVs to help customers get engaged. Hydrogen for maybe larger vehicles, longer haul type applications where there might be a role. So I'm a believer in all of the above until we prove it doesn't make sense.
Great. Yeah, I agree completely. People often ask me about internal combustion engines, and I usually say, lots of people still like to ride horses. So there's a role for every technology. With that, though, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Let me give you one last rapid fire, 30 seconds or less, please. One thing you're looking forward to in 2024. Let's see. I'm going to go Austin first.
Lots to be excited about. I'll try to be uncharacteristically quick. I think I'm looking forward to seeing investments becoming reality. I mentioned some of those big investments we've seen announced. Well, now we're going to start to see those become facilities. We're going to see manufacturing conversion grants going out to support the transition for at-risk facilities, making sure that the communities that rely on auto and parts manufacturing continue to do that and see growth. In those areas, we see an increased employment in the EV future. And then EV chargers going in the ground, built in U.S. facilities. If you go back a year,
Great.
Our capacity to build DC fast chargers was 0. And that's just really exciting to see that going into reality.
Great. Matt?
Sure. I think I'm looking forward to seeing the EPA strengthen and finalize rules for cleaner cars and trucks, and formally recognize the growing number of states that have already adopted these super awesome clean cars rules. And then on a personal note, I'm looking forward to finally seeing what the EV Equinox has to offer.
Alex?
People know I grew up in a family restaurant business, over 100 years old. I'm sort of just happy getting my hands dirty. A little bit like Austin said, we have over 1,000 stalls installed with EV Go. We got a few dozen sites now in with pilot. We have the OEM joint venture that we didn't talk about. It's going to get off and running. We have Tesla opening up its network. I think by the end of next year, if we do this the right way, we have started to change the narrative on charging, right, as it relates to living with an EV, and people see charging all around them. The experience is improving. They're finding less and less those notions of like, it didn't work for me and I'm frustrated, but they're starting to see it throughout their life. So I think there's the Kickstarter next year. It's going to be a lot more visible and a lot more fun because we're going to get in the weeds and go execute.
All right, Andrea, last word to you.
Yeah, like Matt, really hoping to see the EPA enact some really strong rulemakings on tailpipe emissions for heavy duty and light duty vehicles, and to have more states continue to lead the way on passing strong clean cars and clean trucks policies, and to make sure that everybody is listening to the communities that need to be listened to the most.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I'll selfishly say I'm most looking forward to taking our Roadmap conference to Detroit next September. We'll have a link to that in our show notes for sure too. But with that, I'm going to hand it back to Cindy and say thanks again for all of you for your time, for participating today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Matt, Andrea, Alex, Austin, and Jeff, for such a great way to end our season this year. And I know Alex mentioned family restaurant business. That and Roadmap and many more is something to look forward to when you book your trip to Detroit next year. In September to join us for the Roadmap conference. I just want to say again, thank you so much to everyone who have joined us this past year. We're cooking up something exciting for next year with our webinar season. So look forward to more information on that. And as I wrap up, don't forget we're hosting 2 workshops, Design and Fund Equitable Electric Mobility in your communities next year, April and March. More information will be in the webinar recap. Again, thank you all. Happy holidays, and we'll see you all in 2024. Thank you.